Hey guys, it's Jasma, and today I'm making a chocolate bundt cake, and this is dedicated to our beloved debate coach, Rudi. This is a very soft and spongy chocolate cake. It is one of my favorite recipes. Today I'm making a bundt cake, but you can use any type of shaped pans to use as a perfect chocolate base for any type of cakes. This is really quick and easy to put together and also very delicious as well. It is great for parties and it's really easy to share, and also a really great way to thank somebody for all of their help and support. So first off, preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit because this cake, once again, is really quick and easy to put together. And you also want to have your bundt cake pan nice and ready to go. In a saucepan, add in the butter. This doesn't have to be softened as we're melting it. And then pour over a cup of water. Then turn the heat up to high. Once the butter is pretty much melted, add in the cocoa powder, along with some instant coffee. Turn the heat down to medium and keep stirring until there are no more clumps of cocoa powder and all of the coffee has dissolved into this mixture. If you're not looking to boil this mixture, just keep stirring until the cocoa powder and coffee has both dissolved, and then you can take it off the heat. Once you transfer the mixture to a clean bowl, set it aside for it to cool down while we work on the dry ingredients. You can also just stir it around like so to speed up the process a little bit. For the dry ingredients, I'm going to pass my all-purpose flour through a sieve to add some more airiness and cause the cake to be even softer. I added some cornstarch into this mixture as well because I find that it adds to the texture of the cake and makes it really nice and soft. So now I'm going to add in some salt, baking soda, baking powder, as well as the white granulated sugar. My chocolate mixture has now cooled down, so when I touch it, it is nice and warm, but no longer burning hot. It is important for you to let this cool down before adding in the eggs and adding this mixture to the flour, because if it is still really hot, it will cook the eggs and cook the flour, and it wouldn't result in a fluffy mixture. Okay. So I'm going to add in the rest of my ingredients into this mixture, starting off with the sour cream. Once the sour cream is combined, crack in 2 eggs, add one in at a time, and mix in before adding the other one. Before I combine the wet and dry ingredients, I'm going to prep my cake tin. So this is nice and clean, and I'm going to spray it with some cooking spray to make sure it is greased so that the cake won't stick to the cake pan after it is baked. Now I'm going to add my dry ingredients into the wet ingredients and mix until there are no more clumps. While the cake is baking, I'm going to prep a super simple chocolate ganache glaze. So to make this, just mix together equal portions of heavy cream and chocolate chips. I'm using semi-sweet chocolate chips today because it's slightly bitter and it nicely balances out the sweetness of the cake. But you can use whatever types of chocolate you like. I'm going to add this to the chocolate. Make sure the cream is covering the chocolate chips and then place this into the microwave for 1 minute. I microwaved my chocolate for 1 minute, let it sit on the counter for a couple minutes as well so that the chocolate completely melts, and then just keep stirring until it becomes a smooth chocolate ganache. While the chocolate ganache is still warm, add about a teaspoon of butter and stir it in until it's completely melted. Cover the chocolate with a layer of plastic wrap and make sure it's actually touching the surface so that as this is cooling down, it won't cause condensation to drip back into the chocolate and possibly changing its consistency. So I find it best to just leave this at room temperature so that it can cool down but not become too cold. This may seem like a really runny mixture right now, but as you leave it, it will thicken up to the right consistency. So I'm just going to leave this here and then I'll check on the cake. My cake is baked in the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 45 minutes. I took it out and I tested if it was cooked completely by inserting a toothpick into the center. If it comes out clean without any batter on it, that means it's completely cooked. So I just left it out on the counter for it to cool down completely, and it is important that you let it cool before flipping it out, because when the cake is still really warm, it's really soft, and if you try to remove it from the cake pan then, you might risk breaking it. So now that it is completely cooled, I'm going to flip it out onto a cooling rack so we can glaze it. Once the ganache is the same temperature as the cake, we can glaze it. It is important that they're both at the same temperature because if the cake is still kind of warm, it will melt the chocolate ganache, but if the cake is colder than the chocolate ganache, it'll set it immediately and you won't be able to get a really smooth and even glaze. So this is at room temperature now, you can feel it. I'm just going to unwrap it. To see if the consistency of the chocolate ganache is ready, I like to test it by using a spatula and holding it up. If the chocolate ganache slides off of the spatula nice and slowly, but it still has a nice and thin layer left over, that means it's ready. If it slides down straight away and there's nothing left, that means it's too thin. If it doesn't slide down at all, or if when the ganache is dripping back into the bowl it forms a ribbon, that means it's too thick. The consistency of the chocolate ganache is quite important here because you want a nice and even layer on top of the cake, and if it's too thin or too thick, it may not cause a smooth surface. So just pour your chocolate ganache over the cake nice and quickly because keep in mind that consistency will change and get thicker over time. If you don't manage to cover all sides at once, it's totally fine. Just catch the drips using a baking tray and then pour it over the cake once again. It looks good. I like to let my cake sit on the counter for a little bit longer so that excess ganache can drip off. You can also tap the cooling rack to speed up this process. And once you have all the excess off of the cake, it is now nice and smooth, we can transfer it onto a cake platter. So I'm using an offset spatula here, and I'm just going to very carefully transfer the cake. Alright, now I'm going to set this aside and work on my chocolate decorations for the cake. For the decorations of this cake, I'm using a technique that I've been doing a lot lately, which is using chocolate candy melts to decorate my cakes. The reason why I like using chocolate candy melts a lot is because it creates a really simple and sophisticated look in a really quick and easy way, and you can do lots of different things with it because chocolate is a lot easier to manipulate. I'm using two different types of chocolate candy melts today, so they're both brown, but one is slightly darker than the other one. And of course you don't have to use different colors, but I think having a variation in this cake, especially in contrast to the cake itself and the chocolate ganache, it creates a more interesting look. So the way I'm going to be using the chocolate candy melts today is by spreading it onto different surfaces to create different textures and then breaking it up and putting it on the cake. So I have two different surfaces here. One is just a piece of reusable parchment paper, so it's nice and flat, and it's going to create a really nice smooth slab of chocolate, which then we can break up later on and stick onto the cake. The second surface I'm using is foil. And this is going to be in contrast to the chocolate ganache itself, as well as the other slab of chocolate, which are both really nice and smooth. So again, I want variation, so I'm going to create texture by crumbling up the foil, melting down the chocolate, and then smoothing it on. So crumble up a piece of foil, and you want to crumble it to the point where it has a rough pattern, but don't do it too tight because you need to be able to smooth it out again afterwards. Alright, that's flattened out. Make sure you don't smooth it out too much because you still want to have some of those bumpy textures in order to create a nice looking chocolate. Now I'm going to melt down the chocolate candy melts, and I'm going to do it one at a time so that it doesn't solidify while I'm smoothing out the other one. I'm going to microwave this for 45 seconds, stir in between until it is completely smooth. Spread out the chocolate until it's really nice and thin and then set it aside for it to solidify. Meanwhile, I'm going to melt down the other one as well in the microwave again for 45 seconds until it's completely smooth. When you're spreading out the chocolate, make sure you work really quickly. You can use offset spatulas, the spatula itself, or you can also use a butter knife. And I sometimes like to wiggle it around as well, just to make sure the surface is nice and smooth. But make sure whatever you do, you work really quickly with the chocolate because it sets really fast, and you don't want to create wrinkles if you're still moving it around when the chocolate is already solidified. If that does happen to you, you can just pop it back into the microwave anytime, microwave it for around 10 seconds, make sure you don't burn the chocolate, and then you can always reuse the same chocolate. Lastly, I'm going to dust some cocoa powder over my chocolate to kind of dull it down a little bit. Since the cake and the other chocolate is also going to be really shiny, I want more variation in terms of texture and the way that it looks. I'm going to take a pastry brush and dip it into some cocoa powder. Then dust it over my chocolate. I like to dust my chocolate so that it stands out from the cake since this is matte and the cake itself is shiny, and it also brings out the 3D effect of the texture. But of course, if you don't want to, you can skip this step as a whole and move straight on to putting it onto the cake. So after I have dusted the bigger pieces of chocolate, I'm going to pick out a few that I can place onto the cake. You want a variation in size so you can break up bigger pieces, and you also want to leave some bigger pieces as itself. Next, I'm going to break up my other chocolate, which is going to be smoother. Lastly, we can put the decorations onto the cake. So I used the leftover chocolate ganache we have from the Glaze and I put it in a bowl. It is now nice and thick, so it's the perfect thing we can use as glue for the chocolate decorations. You can arrange this onto the cake however you like. I like to make it kind of messy and I like to have it sticking out, but again, it's completely up to you. So that's it with this chocolate bundt cake. I like how it turned out abstract and really different from the rest of the cakes I've made before. I think this technique can go a long way, so you can try out different ways to make it unique up to you. I really hope you can try out this cake. It's one of my favorite recipes, like I've said before. It's really moist, soft, and really fluffy as well. If you were to keep it in the fridge, the butter will harden a little bit, so I would recommend microwaving it for around 10 seconds before eating, but you can also store this at room temperature so it stays nice and soft at all times. Thanks for watching, and see you guys next time.